All right, welcome back. Another episode of Good Vibes. I'm Martin Falls, and joined once again by the lovely Debbie Cox Dadova. Debbie, good to see you again.
Good to see you as well.
All right, so breaking emotional addictions. I don't know if I'm on the right path here, but when COVID was going on, the one break I had when I got home, I watched Ozarks on Netflix. I got addicted to it. Now I'm addicted to Suits.
Right.
So is that an emotional addiction, or are we talking about something different?
It could be, but what we're talking about specifically is, well, if you think, let's think about addiction of any other kind, substance abuse, for example, right? When it's said that you are not sober, you've taken something, you've ingested something that is altering your state of consciousness so that you cannot see the world around you clearly. So what we're talking about is emotional addiction, which does the same thing. It impairs your ability to be able to see the world clearly, and you can actually become addicted to emotions, which we've talked about before. And just as a high-level review of that, you're literally, whenever you have a thought, you're literally creating the neuropeptides that are associated with the emotions attached to that, and they flood your system and dock on your cells. And over time, when you do this, basically your cells split off, and the sister cells have more receptor sites for those neuropeptides. So what happens is that the reticular activating system, remember, again, high level brain's filter, basically, to help us pull data, your reticular activating system starts to become very good at pulling from your environment reasons why you should have this thought pattern, this repeated thought pattern or emotional pattern that you have become familiar with. And with that familiarization process, it becomes a desensitization, which happens with addictions of all kinds, to where you now have a hit of, for example, anger that happens in a disproportionate way to what's actually happening in the environment. So maybe, someone accidentally trips and bumps into you, and your anger flares from that, even though from a reasoning conscious place, you know that they didn't do it intentionally. It becomes the reason that you get a hit of that emotion. So it's important to recognize that when we're talking about emotional addiction, it's easy to kind of generate thoughts of anger, right? We know people who have obvious anger issues, right? They obviously are addicted to those. But it's also important to recognize that you can have emotional addictions to things that look like emotional sobriety but are not. So we talked about the attachment styles, right? You have the anxious attached, and the anxious attached is often very activated whenever they are feeling insecure. So that means they move in to try to regulate themselves with someone else. Like, can you make me feel better, right? An avoidant, however, will numb out. They will actually push away. And so sometimes the emotional addiction for someone who has an avoidant attachment style is to numb out. So they don't feel anything, where otherwise they might actually have some emotional feelings. So someone breaks up with them, and an avoidant would be like, oh, well, you're lost, and move on, right? And so that might look like emotional sobriety, but what could be happening there is actually like a dissociation from the experience, a numbing out to protect themselves from feeling, okay? So when we talk about emotional sobriety, and by the way, this information comes from Heidi Priebe again, when we talk about emotional sobriety, what we're talking about is the ability to come into what dialectical behavior therapy calls the wise mind. In the wise mind, you're aware of your feelings. You're honoring your feelings. You're feeling your feelings, but you're also online with your reasoning mind, so that you're able to make a decision that is actually beneficial to you. Because what happens with emotional addiction is the same as maybe with other types of addiction. You have the friend. We all have a friend, right, who gets drunk at the bar and then decides to text the ex or call the ex, right, and tell, either in a romantic way or to tell them off or something like that. Or someone who gets really drunk and they think they can drive. And like, no matter what you say, their mind is telling them like, I'm fine, I can drive, right? And you know that they cannot. And so it's really one of those things to like, it's actually kind of a trick, even for people with secure attachment styles. It can be quite the challenge to be aware of when you are in emotional addiction, when you're actually intoxicated by your own
It's
emotion.
amazing how that alcohol makes that thumb move on that phone, huh?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, and then if you talk to them from that state, they're literally telling you, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. Well, this is a great idea, right?
Right.
Because again, that emotional intoxication will not only try to tell you that your judgment is right, but that you should act on that judgment as well. And it can be as damaging, or if not more, if you're acting on your emotional addictions, or when you're in those emotional intoxicated place, when you're making big action steps in your life that can alter your future. it's really important for you to actually be able to recognize that and do something about it so that you don't derail your life, and that you're able to actually incorporate what your wise mind might
A
otherwise
good
have
thing
to do.
would be to, even when you're intoxicated and you pick up the cell phone and you're going, toot, 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 then you go, this is really going to look stupid on the other end. Delete.
Exactly. Now, and so this is the issue, is that most people are not able to access that part, or they remember regret, which, by the way, regret is what Heidi Priebe says is a pretty good indicator. It's not fail proof, but it's a pretty good indicator. If you do something from an emotionally addicted place, emotional intoxication, usually after everything has calmed down, 24 hours later, 2 days later, a few months later, you will have deep regret about what you did. And that's how you know that you're in emotional addiction. And when we come back, I can tell you the steps on how to approach your emotional addiction so that you can actually release the intoxication, or release the addiction to it. And in the meantime, while you're releasing it, not put yourself in a position where you're unsafe to that intoxicated self.
How many times did I grab a friend's cell phone and hit the red button? And sometimes in the past, they should have picked up my phone and hit the red button.
And that's part of it, surrounding yourself by people who are actually sober.
I got your back.
Exactly.
Beep. It's going. All right, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Great topic. And anybody out there says they've never been through that, you're fibbing. We'll be back. Today's social media segment is brought to you by Terrebonne General Health Systems, modern technology, and timeless caring. Rouse's, you're either local or you're not. Buick, the craft of modern luxury. St. Martin and Bork, know your rights. All right, we're back. Part 2 of Breaking Emotional Addictions. Martin False with Debbie Cox DeNova. And I'm singing during the break the Antebellum song. It's 1:15, I'm all alone and I need you now. That's the cell phone thing.
That's the cell phone
They're drinking. They're both drunk. They're drinking. And you get brave when you get a little couple of shots in you.
You do, and you can actually use your substance intoxication to actually support an emotional addiction. So, like limerence. Limerence, we talked about, is that sort of like convolution between reality and fantasy, where you put a halo effect around someone and maybe assign positive characteristics to that person that are not actually reflective of their true personality, right? So you're kind of holding them up
You
here.
make them a saint.
Yes. So when you are intoxicated on alcohol, you might be reinforcing your relationship to that fantasizing limerence kind of feeling toward one person. So, and again, you can actually have an emotional addiction to self-reliance. So you can actually assign character traits to yourself that you are invulnerable, right? And then that can actually be detrimental to you in an instance where being vulnerable and asking for help is actually beneficial to you, but you've decided, or you've had this emotional addiction to being someone who's self-reliant. You can have obsessive thoughts. You can have all sorts of emotional addiction, dissociation, where you numb out, like we talked about, right? So it's important to note that it doesn't always look big and obvious, okay? When we're coming to emotional sobriety, once again, what we're talking about is coming to wise mind, where you're feeling the emotion, you're willing to feel those emotions, you're not dissociating from them, but your reasoning mind is also online, so you are able to make a sound decision, a conscious decision, from a level playing field.
And I think maturity helps with that, because I remember I wrote a song, Drive By Dummy, because I was at a party one day and we were joking. I said, well, how many of y'all have never had a drive-by after you broke up? And they all looked at each other and went, well, I did, Bubba. And everyone to a T, even the women. Yeah, I drove by so-and-so's house, so I wrote a song, Drive By Dummy.
I love it.
But if you allow anger to sneak up into a breakup, it's so much difficult to see it clearly.
Yes. And it's difficult to see, like I said, even from a secure attachment style. When you are in an emotional intoxication, it is very difficult to know. That's why we're going to go through these 5 steps that can help with it. Okay, so the first one is to notice your patterning. So in a place when you're emotionally regulated, in other words, you're feeling physically and emotionally safe, write down the top 5 things that trigger you, like the patterns that trigger you. The people, if you have an insecure attachment style, it might be family. Go around your family, you know, that one family member, they say that thing, and you go into an emotionally irregulated place. Write that down so you can understand the patterning for yourself, okay? Just to kind of understand what triggers me specifically. Number 2 is that you're going to name those triggers, okay? So you're actually going to say to yourself, like, I'm going to map out the environments that get me triggered so that I can minimize the impact on my life when I go into an emotionally dysregulated place. And this is especially true if you are someone who has like explosive anger and rage, you know, that sort of thing. Number 3, you want to develop an action plan. So rules and regulations from your wise mind. You only want to do an action plan from a place of regulation, okay? From a place of wise mind. What would your wise self want you to do in a time when you are in an emotionally intoxicated place? So speaking of like comparing it to alcohol, right? If you know that you have a tendency after maybe the 4th drink to start dialing your ex, right? You actually make a rule for yourself and make it very simple, because usually what we're talking about is a 4-year-old version of yourself, like a very young version of yourself. What rules and regulations do you need to put into place? So if this, then, if I have 4 drinks, I'm not allowed to pick up my phone, right? And you ask for support from your sober friends or your designated driver, like, hey, look, monitor me, right? At the 4th one. And so that's alcohol or substance abuse, but like, or some substance intoxication. But if you're just in an emotionally intoxicated place, oftentimes, you know that sometimes you want to make decisions over your future. I want to quit my job. I want to like do something really desperate from that place of emotional intoxication because you're trying to escape the discomfort. You're trying to make yourself feel better.
Something just came to my mind.
What's that?
Grey Goose makes my maturity loose.
It's a song. Number 4 is work on the things. So after if you know that you have a relationship to, for example, shame, rejection, those things actually tip you over into triggers, like no matter where you go, you're going to want to do the work to be able to sit with those emotions and actually feel them, because you want to make sure that you are able to experience shame, for example, without trying to push the eject button no matter what it is, punch somebody in the face, you know, like tell somebody off. You know that you're in emotional dysregulation when you have the feeling and it wants to overtake you and run your actions, okay? You can dislike somebody from an emotionally regulated place and prefer not to be around them. It's much more balanced, okay? Number 5 is to have positive expectations or realistic expectations of this process. You definitely do want, if you're an alcoholic and you're trying to stop drinking, you don't want to put yourself around your bar friends all the time in the bar and try to stop drinking there. Most people who have emotional addiction have surrounded themselves by community who are also like-minded. And so they'll be yes men. Oh yeah, girl, you should call him and tell him off. Right. And so those people will actually keep you in the emotional addiction. They'll reinforce and validate it without giving you the balanced feedback that maybe this is something that you're playing into and that sort of thing. The other thing is that you need to be prepared that when you are willing to sit with and process your emotions, you might be going through a level of discomfort you're not used to. It's not going to necessarily tickle, okay? You're actually going to have an experience where you need to be willing to be uncomfortable in order to have a healthy relationship with emotion.
All right, there we got it. Great segment. Grey Goose makes my maturity loose. All right, we'll see you next week on Good Vibes.